appreciated. All right, well, welcome to the launch. I'm very, very proud to be able to present this launch tonight. We've got the book that's called The Crime of Not Knowing Your Crime by Karen Throssell. And the book also includes a contextual essay by Phil Deery, who I know quite a few of us know and admire his work. My name's Lisa Milner, and I'm one of the team at Interventions. It's just terrific to be able to host this, and I'd like to particularly thank the co-hosts, which are NIBS, the New International Bookshop, and the Search Foundation. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands we're on here today, and to pay my respects to the elders past and present. I'm joining this session from Gumbaynggirr country, which is on the mid-north coast of New South Wales. So I'd just like to acknowledge that the land was never ceded and always remains, always will be Aboriginal land. Now, I just want to give a quick overview of how the event will run. Tonight, we're going to hear from three speakers. We're going to hear from Janie Stone, from Jeff Sparrow, who will launch the book, and then from Karen herself. We're going to have an opportunity for questions at the end. The chat box is open and we'll be posting links in there. I encourage everyone to open up their chat box so they can see what's going on there. For the talks by Janie, Jeff and Karen, all of us viewers will be muted while the speakers are talking, and then we'll change the situation for the Q&A, of course. I'd just like to say the book, the recommended retail price for the book is $40, but if you buy it from NIBS online today, and you will have received a link to that in your invitation for the event today, you get it on special for $35. That's a special price, and that discount ends tomorrow night. So the link will be put in chat again, so you can order online now. Now, as you can see in the chat, we are going to be recording this event and streaming it on Facebook Live for people who are joining us on other platforms. And that's great that we've got that opportunity to do that while we can't meet in person, of course. Now, we're co-hosting the event with NIBS, who we love very much, the New International Bookshop, and they stock all our books. I'd encourage you to like them on Facebook and Instagram, and the book is available from NIBS online, and I'm hoping if it's open for after the Melbourne lockdown's finished, after the event. The co-hosting that we've got today, I'm very pleased to acknowledge the Search Foundation. And again, please find out about the Search Foundation, who do wonderful work, and check out their online information. I would firstly like to introduce our first speaker, Janie Stone. Now, Janie Stone is really the founding member of Interventions, which she's been doing since 2015. Janie is a lifelong socialist and activist. She has done writing in a lot of areas and works in multimedia as well. And I'd like Janie to come and speak to us now. Thank you, Janie.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. I've sort of got a conflicting message there. Okay, thanks everybody. I'd just like to welcome everybody here again and say how delighted I am to see how many people are here. And I'm sure there are people watching the Facebook live stream as well. So I'm just going to be very brief here before we get on to the real core of this meeting. I just want to give you a quick introduction to Interventions, which has published, that's the company that's published the book that we're all here to hear about. So Interventions is Australia's only independent, radical, not-for-profit publisher, which was actually set up in 2015, although there was a predecessor association prior to that. And we publish left-wing, radical, anti-capitalist and socialist books by Australian authors. And generally they're books which for political or financial reasons are unlikely to be accepted by commercial publishers. And in doing this, we see ourselves as acting in the tradition of the Australasian Book Society, which many of you will know about from the 50s and 60s. So our books cover a wide range of topics, including Labor history, left-wing politics, radical cultural themes, Marxism, memoirs, and works about resistance to racism, sexism, and all other forms of oppression. Most of our books would not have been accepted by mainstream publishers, or, as I've said, or if they were, they may well have required a watering down of their political content. While we make a big effort to maintain professional standards in relation to the writing and production quality of our books, and we will provide input into expression and the quality of the argument in the book that the books that we're publishing, we do not censor content. So our books are aimed at a market of left-wing people, social activists, environmentalists, trade unionists, and socialists. And in other words, we're aiming our books not just at entertainment. We want our books to go to people who want to read them, to become informed, and to help them in their activism. And to do this, we need to keep our prices accessible. I mean, you'll all be aware that very often academic books sell for often over $200, and even many non-academic books, $70, $80. We do our absolute best to keep the prices down. And although our books are available through all the conventional sources and bookshops, we do encourage people to buy from NIBS, New International Bookshop, who are co-hosting this event, or from one of the other left-wing bookshops around Australia, such as New Morning Books in Adelaide. So we've all been through a difficult year, 18 months. But one of the interesting things for us is that lockdown here has actually meant an increase in people reading and in demand for books that help explain our society. For us as publishers, this past year has been difficult in the sense that we've been unable to hold in-person events to launch our books. For example, tonight, we thought we were great here in Australia, and then everything hit the fan here in Melbourne and we had to switch to Zoom only. But even through lockdown, we have still managed to produce a number of fantastic books. And I just want to show you a couple of examples. These are from the last couple of years. So here are two of our books on Australian labour history: Without Bosses, Radical Trade Unionism in the 70s, Stuff the Accord Pay Up, about the workers' resistance to the ALP-ACTU Accord. The books in the Red Swan series in Western Australian Labour History and Politics, this one being Radical Perth, Militant Fremantle. Socialist books. Our most recent book, Before the Crime of Not Knowing Your Crime, The Fight for Workers' Power, Revolution and Counter-Revolution in the 20th Century, by Tom Bramble and Nick Armstrong. Two books on international struggles. All our books are by or associated with Australian authors, but they're not only about Australian subjects. Against the Storm, book about the resistance to the regime in Japan by print workers during the Second World War, translated by Kay Broadbent, and Losing Santhia, about the Tamil struggle in Sri Lanka by Ben Hillier. And Queer History, Revolution is for Us by Liz Ross, a book about the left and gay liberation in Australia, and representing our new series, Queer Ausfolk, which is edited by Graham Willett. This book is the first in that series, The Mystery of the Handsome Man. This series is dedicated to bringing to life biographies of people who had to live in the closet in the last century or the century before. We have more books in that series on the way. So I just want to wrap up now by saying how we came to actually publish The Crime of Not Knowing Your Crime, which is there. Some of you may be now seeing the front cover for the first time. We first made contact with Karen through people we met at the Perth conference of the Australian Society for the Study of Labour History in late 2019. Karen's manuscript had been shortlisted by University of Western Australia Press for the Dorothy Hewitt Award in 2016, but it had never actually been published by them. We don't know the reason why, of course, but this did smack to us of something political. So when Karen came to us and asked us, would we be interested in publishing her book, we thought this was right up our alley. And the rest is history. I'm now holding it in my hands after nearly 2 years later. It's amazing to see this book finally published. So that's it from me. If you want to know more about interventions, visit our website and drop us a line. If you have a book proposal, you can contact us there. And just ask everybody to look out for the other 4 books that we're still going to be bringing out in the coming months of this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janie. It's lovely to hear that, and especially to hear the story of how we got Karen's manuscript to us in such an interesting way. I'd like to move now to our book launcher himself, Jeff Sparrow. Jeff, as many of you will know, he's a very well-known writer and broadcaster. One of his most recent books about the Christchurch massacre was called Fascists Amongst Us. He has many other titles to his name. He's also written a book called Crimes Against Nature, which is about climate change. And I'd like to turn now to Jeff to officially launch the book. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you for that kind introduction. It's lovely to see so many comrades and friends, albeit virtually. I'd like to think that at some stage in the not too distant future, we will all manage to be in the same room together. Let me start by offering my congratulations to Karen and to Interventions for bringing this book into the world, and in such a handsome volume too. Those who have seen a physical copy know that this is a really splendid production of the book. Now, I saw some early material from this project quite some time ago. To be honest, I was trying to work out exactly how many years ago it was, and couldn't actually get my head straight around it. Perhaps Karen can discuss it, but it was back a few years. I am so pleased that it's come together, and it's come together in the way that it has. As anyone who's been involved in writing knows, some books are like fast food in that you throw them together really quickly, and others are slow cookers. And I think we all know which are more nourishing in the end. And I think now that we've got this volume physically in our hand, or at least some of us have, it's easy to forget the strength and the perseverance that an author needs to see a project to the end, particularly when that project stretches over years. It's easy to become discouraged. It's easy to give up. Yet books take as long as they take, especially when you're trying to do something that's interesting or difficult or innovative. And I think that what's happened with this particular book is that Karen's found the perfect form for the content she wants to present. As those who've read The Crime of Not Knowing Your Crime will know, this is a book that combines biography, memoir, poetry, and history in order to tell the story of Ric Throssell and his family. It's not a straightforward story and could not be told in a straightforward way. Instead, as a mashup of a dizzying array of different genres, I think it effectively conveys the disorientation engendered by Ric's persecution, the sense, as he once put it himself, of being in a wilderness of mirrors. In any case, while this is a book that's been marinating for a long time, in 2021, now that it's being served up, I think in some ways it's more timely than it would have been in the past. Why do I say that? Well, I think there's at least 3 reasons why this book is really well suited to the moment in which it's appeared. Firstly, I think recent events have shown us that the original Cold War, the period at the centre of this book, remains remarkably influential in today's world. Actually, this was something that I started thinking about back in 2016 when Donald Trump was first elected, and we were all trying to come to terms with who this guy was and what he represented. I remember reading a short biographical sketch of Trump and then being poleaxed when I saw that the greatest mentor in his life was a lawyer called Roy Cohn. I thought, this cannot be the same guy, Roy fucking Cohn. But of course it was. Roy Cohn, the sidekick of Joe McCarthy, the prosecutor responsible for sending the Rosenbergs to the electric chair. He was the guy who influenced Donald Trump more than anyone else. And it seemed to me that what we were seeing was a history that you might have thought was long past, from the same period that Karen writes about in this book, but yet it was back in the centre of world politics. And I think you can see something similar in Australia. I've got a morbid obsession with The Australian, a paper that no one much reads other than the people who run the country. And it's astounding how many of its columnists have a political pedigree that you can trace back to B.A. Santamaria and Catholic Action and some of the forces that were ranged against people like Ric Throssell and Katharine Susannah Prichard. As William Faulkner said, the past is never dead, it's not even past. So that's one reason why the story in this book matters today. The second reason, of course, is to do with the agency central to the persecution of Ric Throssell. The subtitle of this book is Ric Throssell against ASIO. And I'm sure some of you here are old enough to remember how when the Berlin Wall came down, there was throughout the mainstream for a brief period a discussion about abolishing ASIO, how this was an institution that was no longer required in the post-Cold War world. Well, how long ago does that seem now? As they say, 9/11 and the war on terror changed everything. In the decade immediately after 2001, the budget of ASIO was increased 5-fold, and those increases have kept on coming. This year, we learned that ASIO will gain over the next decade an extra $1.3 billion, with the government claiming that the spending was justified by the more complex security environment. And I would put it to you that it's very difficult to think of an environment in which they will not say that the funding of ASIO is now justified. And it's not just the extra money and the extra personnel and the huge building in Canberra that ASIO now has. It's also the extra capabilities. I'm sure everyone here will know that ASIO now possesses extraordinary powers. It can detain people without charge. It can send people to jail on terrorism charges, even if they haven't actually committed a terrorist act or chosen a target or accessed any weapons. That very vague preparatory acts are enough for a 20-year jail sentence. And if those powers aren't sufficient, ASIO has access to a technological wizardry that the spooks who surveilled Ric Throssell and Katharine Susannah Prichard could never have dreamed of. With a few keystrokes, it can access all your emails, all your phone calls, all your messages, all your pictures, even the ones that you've deleted. It can know via your GPS where you are every second of the day, of every day. It can use your own devices to record your conversations, even if they're switched off. It can access every keystroke you have ever typed on your computer. And what's even worse, ASIO currently enjoys a public cache that it never did in the past. I'm sure I'm not the only one who has been astonished when you're browsing some social media platform to be served up an ad telling you to join ASIO. These sort of social media ads that makes ASIO look this funky, glamorous place to work. And that's why knowing the story of Ric Throssell and other people like him matters so much. because we are in an environment today where similar injustices are going to keep happening and on a much, much wider scale. So that's the second reason why this book is so important and timely today. But the third reason I think is even more significant, and it's the main reason why I'm so glad that this book has now seen the light of day. And that's simply that we are currently embroiled in a new and extraordinarily dangerous Cold War, a Cold War that in some ways I think is even more volatile and threatening than the one that's discussed in this book. We now have leading figures in the defence establishment openly discussing a military conflict with China, a conflict that they say is now more likely than not. We have politicians and journalists talking about a war between the United States and China, a war that would inevitably become nuclear as something not only possible, but even desirable. And for those who remember the old Cold War, or who've read about it in Karen's book, the rhetoric is remarkably familiar, directed not only at an external enemy, but also and perhaps especially at an enemy within. Once again, we have a public sphere full of accusations about spying, about agents of influence, about disloyalists and treachery and so on. And the politics of such conflicts can be incredibly complex and difficult to negotiate. I've been reminded of this recently because I work at Melbourne University, where many in the Centre for Advancing Journalism, where many of our students are from China, many of them because of the pandemic are studying from within China via Zoom. And so we are dealing with a situation where many of our students are terrified to speak openly about journalism and, investigating wrongdoings because they're conscious that their own government is surveilling them. Yet we're in a position where the university's response to this is to try to get ASIO involved to monitor Chinese influence. And so negotiating your way through these conflicts, trying to do the right thing by your students while trying to avoid an escalation of this Cold War rhetoric is not simple by any way, shape or means. And that's why I think it's so important to learn from history. And that's why the story in this book matters so much. It's a story that stretches right back to the very inception of the modern left, with Katharine Susannah Prichard, Ric Throssell's mother, involved in the very early days of the Communist Party of Australia. But it's a story that, as I've said, touches on issues that anyone involved in politics today should understand. Issues that are only going to become more important if and when we manage to rebuild a left wing. So I'm very pleased to see it in print. I encourage you all to get a copy. If we were in the one spot, I would say that Karen would be willing to sign it. And I would ask you, well, I don't know if I'm the only one who's drinking, but I'll ask anyone else to charge your glass and raise it high while I officially declare the book launched. Hurrah.
Hurrah.
A bit embarrassing that I am the only one drinking.
No, I had a cup of tea.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for a wonderful launch, for the kind words and for raising a glass to Karen's book and its inception. It was really interesting to hear from you, your opinions of its importance, and particularly, I think, how timely it is that it's coming out right now. I think that's a fantastic thing. I'd just like to say, for the people who are joining us late, the book's available. Recommended retail price is $40, but if you buy it from Nibs online today or tomorrow, you can get a discount and it will be only $35. So you can order that now. I'd like to turn now to Karen Throssell herself. Karen is an award-winning writer and poet. She's got 5 poetry collections and a book of creative nonfiction from 1988, The Amazing Book, which is one of my favourites, The Pursuit of Happiness. Karen's also published in journals and anthologies like Overland, Westerly, quadrant, meanjin, and art streams. Now, Karen was shortlisted for the 2017 Book of the Year Award for the poetry section by the Society of Women Writers. And as we've heard earlier, an earlier version of this book, The Crime of Not Knowing Your Crime, was shortlisted in 2017 for the Dorothy Hewitt Award for Works of Creative Nonfiction. All of Karen's work has reflected her lifelong commitment to literature, to feminism, to radical politics. And it's wonderful to see Karen continuing that. So Karen, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lisa. And thank you to Jeff for a very generous launch. You've always been one of my heroes, and so I was absolutely delighted when Janie suggested you as a launcher. And yes, as you implied, I did attend one of your creative nonfiction classes, and I can't remember how long ago either. It was a long time ago, and you know, so I've actually learned a lot about the form from you back then, but also you were the one who said you should start writing about your family, and that was the actual germ of the whole project. I'd also like to welcome everyone else here tonight. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces, and some I know are from a long way away, which is one of the few benefits of Zoom, I think, that anyone can join. I know it's sad that we can't see each other in the flesh, but after several attempts at organising real launches starting last year, I'm happy that at least we can release the book into the world in whatever way we can. Towards the end of my book, I include a letter my brother Jim wrote, where he quotes Dad saying, "When I'm dead, the cowards will come out of the shadows because I won't be around to defend myself against their libel. Don't waste your energy fighting them. You'll have even less chance than I did. At least you might know who they are." Jim's letter was written in 2012 after another Ric Throssell Russian spy headline appeared in the press, 13 years after Dad's death. So he was right on that count, but ever the disobedient daughter, I ignored his plea, and I did spend a lot of energy trying to correct the persistent misinformation. And I hope it wasn't a waste of time. Most of my friends who are here will know the basic story, and I imagine all of the people I don't know too. If you're on the left, you have to know a bit of the story. But I'm sorry if you're hearing what you already know, but you won't have heard a lot of my backstory or my poems. This is a story of my father, Ric Throssell, accused of being a Russian spy by Vladimir Petrov in the Cold War 50s. Despite his exoneration by the Royal Commission into Espionage and his continued protestations of innocence, he was hounded by ASIO and the Cold War warriors in the media for the rest of his life. It was the continuation of this campaign where, as he says, he could no longer defend himself, that I decided I must pick up the baton. And I'd already written poems relevant to the topic, also poems about mum and dad and about issues that actually come into the book later. But I decided to embark on research about the much wider issues, rereading Dad's autobiography, My Father's Son, then reading the transcripts from the Royal Commission into Espionage, fabulous reading if you've got time. Books by spies, Burgess, MacLean and Blunt, about spies or alleged spies, Julian Assange, and books about the Petrov Commission. There was so much out there. I decided to try and put it all together, but how to do it? I'd already been convinced that in the right circumstances, creative nonfiction, convinced by Jeff, creative nonfiction could reach a different audience than straight academic presentations, especially if the information being presented has the potential to be dense or dry, if not presented properly. I'd also learned about the impact of marrying form to content, especially then in relation to poetry, but I decided this would be an important way to try and present this information. So this is to explain the form if people open the book and wonder why I've got things labelled as items, because it's supposed to look like what I imagine an ASIO dossier looks like. A combination of this and maybe a scrapbook of letters, quotes, dictionary definitions, poems, anything that could help to build up a case. In this instance, my father's case, proving his innocence and the state's collusion in his lifelong persecution. My efforts soon became more than a search for a way to stop this flow of misinformation. It also became a study of the psychology of spies and those who were obsessed by them. And I needed to understand what my father wasn't. Whilst you'll need to read the book to see whether I found any answers, I can give you a taste of both the story and the style by reading a few poems from the book. And the first poem I'm going to read is called The Old King, and it's an homage to my father, which hopefully shows something about the real man, the man who wasn't a spy. One of the things he was a passionate thespian who loved Shakespeare, and he played most of Shakespeare's tragic heroes. The Old King. The old king has gone, exit stage left, not to the thunderous applause for all those other exits, save that of jealous friends who wished to emulate his final act or cheered his greatness, his late greatness. He was the Prince of Denmark, suffering slings and arrows, outrageous fortune all his life. But he did take arms against the world's troubled seas, personally feeling all its pain, and his soul believing that by opposing he would help end them. No more, no longer nobler in his mind to suffer, to bear the whips and scorns of time. He chose to die, asleep to end the heartache. This Lear too demanded extraordinary love of his beloved three, a love not even promised by the snake-tongued sisters, sufficient love to let him go untimely. And Lear raged with oak-cleaving thunderbolts in a way our dear king did not. He did not wish to live, pray, sing and tell old tales and laugh at gilded butterflies. He chose to die, asleep to end the heartache. Of the Scottish king he shared no traits, save his Celtic once dark hair and skin so fair that carefree childhood under the wrong sun recalled a moth and flame. And yes, he had ambition, no black and deep desires, but for an end to war, his life a fight for peace. But too early thought his battle done, laid down his sword and chose to die. Out, out, brief candle, asleep to end the heartache. But hold, I cannot say amen. The old king is gone, our father, our king, and whilst he would have cried that life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, we too stood upon that stage, now empty, save for the heartache. When I was 7, I went to stay with my cousins in Yarra Junction when my parents had to leave our home in Canberra to attend the Royal Commission into espionage in Sydney. This next poem I'm going to read is called A Pantoum. And for those unfamiliar with poetic forms, a pantoum is a poem with a pattern of repeating lines. And so if you think I'm repeating myself, it's intentional. What I'm trying to do in this poem is to show the sinister nature of Cold War thinking from a child's perspective. It also gives us an indication of why calling a royal commission mightn't always help us discover the truth. The poem is entitled A Major Government Inquiry into a Matter of Great Public Importance, which is the dictionary definition of a royal commission. Royal commissions find out the truth. Mum and Dad go away for the trying. They were definitely not Russian spies. I was only small and I couldn't go with them. Mum and Dad go to Sydney for the listening? Were they off to Russia? My school teacher asked. I was only small and I couldn't go with them. Our greengrocer said he wouldn't serve commos. Sneaking to Russia, my school teacher said. No, they're in Sydney where the fairies are. The greengrocer said he wouldn't serve commos. You can't say that, my daddy's a policeman. They're going to Sydney where the ferries are. What are these commos? I think they're baddies. You can't say that, my daddy's a policeman. Betsy next door says commos like swearing. They talk about commos, I think they're baddies. The commission found out they weren't Russian spies. Betsy next door says commo's a bad word. Royal commissions find out the truth. As I said before in the preparation for the book, I did a lot of reading about spies and spying, trying to understand the psychology behind it. So I thought I'd read a poem that came out of this process. It's called Who Wants to Be a Russian Spy? Not that I care if they call me pro-Russian. Those days we all loved the workers' paradise. Chandeliers in the metro, miners at the Bolshoi, no more rich czars nailing hats to heads. Of course, there's the bad stuff, like no product choice and grey queues for sameness. Only one newspaper cynically called Truth. All that corruption, the dashes, the kickbacks. It's not that I care if they call me pro-commo. It's a wonderful theory destroyed by men. From each according to ability to each according to need sounds fine to me. A world based on sharing is utopian. Human nature is basically mean. We're grasping, competitive, and we know even the purest have their price. I do care, however, if they call me a spy. Though spook sounds more friendly, if a bit spectral. But treachery, treason, the weight of those words. Tarring and feathering and locking away. We know from TV, we love the spy catchers. Our hair swinging, chin chiseled, sexy enforcers. They die for their country and they love their jobs, defeating the menace, red, yellow or black. But it's all got more complex. Those glamorous spooks are now on the nose. CIA, MI5, they do their own thing, creating havoc all over the world. Then Assange, Manning, Snowden, expose them and their lies. This new brand of traitor, spies, spying on spies. I'm now going to, the final poem has the line that gave the book its title, The Crime of Not Knowing Your Crime. It's an attempt to show the Kafkaesque nature of the world my father had to endure, a world where you never understand the basis of the accusations against you. And I'm really pleased to be handing over to Bri, who asked if they could read it. And I have to move, I think.
G'day. So first of all, I want to say I'm super proud of my mum, Karen. She's the best. And yeah, I just wanted to, participate and show my support by reading this poem. And hopefully I do it justice. So it's called The Man Who Wasn't There. He was there again today, parking darkly, discreetly distanced, disappearing fast around sharp corners, stepping behind me, stopping when I turn. Why are they watching? What have I done? They all seem to know, eyes averted, stage whispers halting when I pass. Discreet parking, snide whispers, disappearing around corners. Stop, I say. What have I done? You know what you've done. Confess, the Red Queen shouts. Off with his head. Black crows line up in judgment. You're fucked. Confess, they squawk. What have I done? How can I confess when I have no idea? Ah, so you've committed the crime of not knowing your crime. Off with his head. So the crime of innocence? Don't get smart. You know what you've done. But you just said I didn't. You're fucked, scream the crows. The judges roar, shrieks and cackles, mad barnyard laughter, undercurrent of crow. You'll never escape us. We know what you've done. I'm screaming now. What have I done? You've got us for life. And then it's your kids, guilty forever of not knowing your crime. So they have it all too. Mindless blather from the Fourth Estate, meaningless questions from donkeys in suits. Off with their heads. So you're bad because you're wrong, and you're wrong because you're bad. And the children cry, what did he do? Guilty as charged. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. That was great. This book grew over a long period, so there are a lot of people to thank. The same people who got me started also kept me going through the highs and lows of the 10-year journey. It wasn't all writing, it was quite a process of sending out to publishers and getting enough rejections to then put it in the not ready yet drawer or the almost given up drawer. But through this whole period, my wonderful friend Carmel McDonald Graham has stood, and John Jenkins was also there from the very beginning and was closely involved in our group workshopping sessions. The creative friendship of these two, their inspiration, encouragement and staying power made all the difference. Our other friends in writing groups I've been part of are also important, and I give huge thanks to Cheryl Simpson, Anne Connor and Kathy Hainstock. There are other people along the way, like Susan Engelbrecht, a WA playwright who gave early support for the project. Jeff, who I've also mentioned, whose politics and writing have inspired me for a long time, is also a highly skilled teacher of creative nonfiction and sowed early seeds about the genre and that I've learned to love. Geordie Albiston, my poetry editor, was not only important for the poetry, she was vital in the development of the format and layout of the book. I feel very privileged to have had a poet of such calibre involved in this project. And over many wonderful Greek meals and a few bottles of bread, Phil Deery shared his formidable knowledge of the history and people who played an important role in Australia's own McCarthy era. And then he became vital to the development of the book, so much so that he was invited to contribute to the book itself, as you see by his detailed yet concise contextual essay at the end of the book. Nan McNabb was scrupulous in her copy editing, and her gentle but significant suggestions over several years and several versions have also made a real difference. This list of thank yous is a testimony to the value of friendship. Even most of my professional helpers forgave me after the exhausting process of editing and have become good friends. It also continues to be a family affair, for as well as Jim's contribution, a huge thanks to Ric Throssell, not only for their reading, they inherited the family acting ability rather than me, but also for all the help with the promotional appearance and material they worked on for the numerous rescheduled events. But of course, it is to Janie Stone, Lisa Milner, and the rest of the team from Interventions whom I have to thank for having confidence in the project and seeing it to fruition. I want to give special thanks to Victoria Ivanova for her huge job on the graphic design, not an easy task and done with great patience and imagination. They all not only recognised the importance of getting my father's story out there, they appreciated the unorthodox form and were not intimidated by poetry, as many publishers are. I'm thankful that courageous and truly independent publishers like Interventions still exist and in fact flourish even in these straitened times. And I encourage you all to support their wonderful work. Again, thanks to you all for being here. And if you're thinking about not buying a book, remember, we have your names.
Thank you, Karen, for that wonderful, wonderful series of poems, information, thank yous. And thank you, Bri, for that wonderful performance of that last poem. I'm so pleased that so many people that Karen has acknowledged in the last part of her talk are here tonight with us, including Phil Deery. And I have to say that, again, it's not just Karen's book that brings this to life, Philip's contextual essay for those historians amongst us. And many people will know, you know, Philip's work there. Karen has laboured long and hard on this, and I believe it's one of the most imaginative, interesting, creative non-fiction books I've seen in a long lifetime of reading such books. Again, I encourage you to buy it cheap for tonight and tomorrow, special price of $35. So thank you, Janie, Jeff and Karen for your wonderful contributions tonight. I'm going to turn now to question and answer session, which I know many of you will be familiar with. We've already got a lineup of you folks wanting to ask questions, and Karen and Jeff will be available to answer them. Again, just to say how it works, put your question in the chat and then we'll call on you in turn. And the questioner will be unmuted when I call upon them. I'd like to thank Maddie and her colleague at NIBS for helping to corral these wily cats as well. So our first question is from David. Thank you, David.
How aware was Ric Throssell of Kafka's The Trial? And you did mention that he had a Kafkaesque experience.
Look, my dad was a playwright and widely read. He would have known of Kafka. I think he probably introduced me to him. But you know, and I'm sure I don't remember that he used the term, but that's my term from all the reading I did. That it seemed like this. Well, he called it a wilderness of mirrors, but to me, that the Kafka reference was equally appropriate.
Great, thanks very much for that, Karen. Our next question comes from Penelope.
Thank you. Actually, it's Penny. I don't know why it says Penelope. It's Penny Lockwood, and my father was Rupert Lockwood, so also before. And I just want to thank you, Karen, for writing such an exciting book and for your poetry. I can't wait to get hold of it. And it's also wonderful to see so many good left-wing people on the Zoom screen. I just wondered if your childhood was traumatic because of your father's involvement in the Petrov Commission. You know, like we had our windows broken, I was followed to school, all that sort of stuff. And I wondered if that happened to you.
Well, that little pantoum I read, that had a couple of the examples in it, like the dentist telling us he wouldn't fix our teeth, and we used to have a greengrocer truck that came that refused to sell us vegetables. You know, I remember those things. They didn't. Mum and Dad, I think, tried very hard to shelter me, but the one thing that I did, you know, really did make an impact on me was when they went away to the commission. And I've got a little piece in the book on this, that I went and stayed with my much loved aunt and uncle who lived in the Yarra Valley, and they had, I think, 5 kids, and I was an only child, and I was absolutely initially delighted to have brothers and sisters. And then as the time went on and I couldn't understand why they didn't come back, I got very worried about that. But, you know, like, that was nothing like having windows broken. We didn't get that kind of persecution. I guess it does have an impact, though. I mean, it's something I've never forgotten. And especially the teachers, that you know, that they were pretty nasty at Ainsley Primary School. You know. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that, Karen. Our next question comes from Anne Carson.
I'm just going to, can you hear me okay? Hi, Karen. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I can't wait to read it. Fellow poet, it's very exciting to hear a cross-genre work like this. Yeah, cheers. Woohoo!
Gave me a champagne, thank you.
There's got to be a bit of sort of, you know, wine-based celebration here.
Well, you know, the Mutual Admiration Society, Anne, because your book, Massaging Himmler, I think is one of the best pieces of poetic, creative non-fiction I've ever seen.
That's
So-
lovely of you. And we obviously meet in this space of how do you tell these complex stories, you know? You want to get so many different elements in. And so my question comes from that awareness of how challenging it is to tell the story in poetry and carry that lyric, poetic sort of vibe. And I'm sort of looking at the two things of narrative storytelling, you know, making the page turn, making it move forward, and then the lyric impulse, which is much more about being in the moment and taking in the vibe of that moment. And that was one of the things that I found really hard in massaging Himmler, to find that balance. And I probably erred on the narrative side because that was so compelling.
Yeah.
I just wondered how you feel about that, if you would speak to that, how to balance the narrative and lyric.
Well, look, I was really aware of it, and really aware that, you know, I was writing kind of history and political stuff, and a lot of people who are interested in history and politics aren't necessarily fans of poetry. And I thought, well, that's how I want to do it. You know, I, as you say, you can get the immediacy of the voice with a poem that you can't necessarily get with the narrative. I also was encouraged at one stage to put in those little prose essays throughout. And this was another way of trying to show aspects of Dad and our family and a bit about me. And I was quite resistant because I wanted to see this as Dad's book. And, you know, it's from my perspective, but I really didn't want to put me in it. But I was encouraged to do more of that, to try and create that kind of balance. But look, I don't know about whether I succeeded. I had heaps more poems I wanted to put in and was hosed down a bit by by various editors, but I think I got the ones I wanted in anyway, and to try and achieve that. But it's not an easy road. I take it. Or you're muted again.
Just one more comment, if I could, very briefly. We share Geordie Albiston as a mentor, and she's a past mistress, you might say, of combining prose and poetry. So I just wanted to make...
No, look, it was her book, The Hanging of Jean Lee, that gave, you know, that was really the first inspiration for kind of making it look like an ASIO document and using the items, because the
She's so good at that, isn't she?
Yeah. Well, The Hanging of Jean Lee, if people don't know, is about the history of the first woman, last woman to be hung for murder, and it tells her story as if it's sensational newspapers. And so it starts with the birth column, and then it has all these sensational headings throughout to try and give you the feeling of the way in which she was judged for her class, you know, more than anything, of course, for her actions later on. But, you know, I think it's a brilliant piece of work. And I hope Geordie's watching. She doesn't like launches anymore, but I thought Zoom's there for people like you. So, yes. Yeah.
Anyway, here's an applause for Geordie.
Yeah.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anne, and thanks, Karen, for that. Our next questioner is Craig.
Hi, Karen. Thanks so much for writing that book. I knew your mum and dad fairly well and spent lots of evenings around their place in Ebden Street. And the one thing that struck me a lot about your dad when I was a young fella getting involved in a lot of, you know, protests and disarmament things and so on, was that although the mantle of the past was always there, he never carried it like a tormenting weight. And he was able to put it aside and concentrate on the issues of the present, which at the time was nuclear disarmament, was the big one we were involved in. I wonder if that reflects your own experience of being much closer to him and
Look, I think you're right. I mean, he was depressive. He did talk about the black dog, but he tended to go away into his writing shack and not inflict it on the rest of the family. He had his plays and his, you know, he had lots of other interests. He didn't, you know, I remember vague conversations that I kind of refer to later on in the book when he's trying for promotion and gets knocked back, and another attempt and gets knocked back. I do remember kind of stooped shoulders and you know, sadness, but he didn't kind of inflict it on us at all. He was someone who did carry a lot of his emotions, keep it to himself, really.
Thank you for that.
Thanks.
Our next questioner is actually our own Janie Stone.
So can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. So I've got a question for Jeff, actually.
Oh,
so Jeff, my question is, we know that ASIO collect an enormous amount of data, and anyone who's ever gone to get their own ASIO records can, you know, I just put in, I know there are people here today who collect their own ASIO records, and I've recently put in a request for my parents' ASIO records. There was only a bit from my father, but my mother, who was a member of the Communist Party, but she was never in any leading position, never a member of any committee, never organised anything, 200 pages of ASIO records just on her. And as you're saying, you've said, Jeff, that the amount that they've collected and the way they're operating is they've got a far larger budget, they've got far more resources and so on. But my question is, what do they actually do with all of this? I mean, we know that, and what does it actually mean for us here today? I mean, we know that a lot of people's lives were blighted and they had, they never got jobs that people members of the Communist Party who never got jobs that they applied for and so on. But that's a very specific thing. That's the Communist Party during the Cold War when Russia played a role. What do you think what is going to be ASIO's role in the future with the much more dispersed, people on the left in a number of different organisations? What's going to be their role in the next period or when they really do start using their material?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question, isn't it? Particularly in a context where the information being collected about us isn't simply being collected by ASIO, but of course all the big tech companies have an extraordinary amount of information about every aspect of our lives. And, you know, if anyone's done, there are various websites you can search that will tell you how to see the information that, say, Google has about you or that Facebook has about you, and it's extraordinary. I mean, they know absolutely everything about you. And, you know, like, I mean, it's clear at the moment that ASIO isn't particularly interested in the far left as any kind of threat. And why would they be? I mean, the far left is, you know, is tiny and marginal. But I would have thought that the milieu that you have to look at to get a taste of what can happen is, of course, the Muslim community, where, you know, like people really have, since 2001, have had their lives ruined by ASIO and have been, you know, the subject of all kinds of sort of horrific operations. And looking forward, if we did move into a situation where the Cold War between the United States and China became a hot war, I think then it would be a totally different situation, wouldn't it? You know, and the preparatory work that's been done, the normalization of ASIO, the normalization of all the powers that they have and the normalization of the technology that they have would then become a kind of real issue for anyone who was trying to organize a, you know, anti-war campaign or whatever. So, you know, you have to try and strike a balance with this stuff, because you can use it to terrify yourself, can't you? You can use these discussions to say, you know, they know everything about us, we can't do anything, which is obviously wrong. You know, I mean, one of the interesting things about reading that history of the 1950s is most of the time, ASIO couldn't actually stop communist organising stuff. So we have to avoid that error, but at the same time, you know, it's clear that we do have to take this kind of seriously going forward.
Thank you very much for that, Jeff. It's very interesting to get your views on that. I have a question actually for Karen. As a budding apprentice in the publishing industry, I'd like to hear from you about something which has been touched on a little bit, and that's about the images that ended up being chosen for the book. One of the things that impresses me with the different versions of the e-proof, I guess we could call it, that I've seen over the last few months is the variety of images and the treatment it's been getting. And I wondered if you, when you came to us with the manuscript, if you had any ideas about that were already formed, or did it come along with you with the publishing process?
Look, that's an interesting question, because Janie picked up my idea and went much further with it than I imagined, because one of the first things she said is, oh, I want lots of graphics. And I was delighted, because most publishers back off. And so the number of graphics and even the choice of them was very much to do with Janie. And I, you know, my family have always been, you know, ardent amateur photographers. So I have a lot of photo albums with, you know, lots of photos. I've got mum and dad's old photo albums as well as lots of mine. And so there was a lot to choose from. And there have been, you know, Janie and I spent quite a lot of time poring through these to find what would work and what wouldn't. I was very lucky to have that beautiful photo of Dad, which I had in a, you know, a frame on my mantelpiece, but that's done us a lot of good, that one, you know, on the cover and in all the promotional stuff. But no, I actually had a picture of a lot of different things like quotes and but the extent of the pictures, I think, was, I can thank Janie for actually enlarging on my whole concept, I think.
Oh, that's really interesting to hear from you at this end of the process about that. At the moment, we don't have any other questioners, but so I'm going to open up the chat to statements or comments. If anyone would like to add their comments to that, that would be fantastic. But now Sue has a question.
Where's Sue?
Sue, are you there?
Is that all okay? Can you hear me now?
Can't see you.
Yes, we can hear you, Sue.
She's got her mic off.
Sue,
Is that better? Is that better? You can hear me now?
Yep. Yes.
Good. Okay.
Yes.
Got it. Right. Sorry about this. I'm a bit ignorant of these things. I just wondered, Karen, if you knew Katharine, because obviously you were over in the eastern states when you were growing up with your father. And I wanted to say I've just turned 70, and I remember going up with my mother as a child reasonably often, because we used to go up to help clear the bush and burn the piles of leaves. And I also went up there when my mother just got back from the Soviet Union, and Katharine was asking her to call to account for her behaviour in the Soviet Union, wanting to go into a mental institution, because my mother was a mental health nurse. And Katharine was directed by the Comintern in Sydney to find out why this comrade was so interested in the mentally ill Russians. But anyway, aside from that, that was the last time I saw her, and I would have been about 14. And I was complaining about learning French and saying how hard it was, because she told me she had this enormous correspondence with overseas people, and she was writing in French, you know, and in other languages too. I don't know how she did that, but she said every day she sat down, wrote a very large correspondence to all the people who are following her writing. And just as an aside, years later, in 1981, I noticed the house was up for sale, and I had such fond memories of it, and I loved the position. And so I got an evaluation done, and then I thought, well, this really shouldn't be a private home. So I got in touch with Bruce Lawson, who worked for the Minister for the Arts, whose name I've just forgotten. It was the Labor government at the time. I think it was the Burke government. And Joan Williams, who was a family friend and was a CPA member. And the two of them put their heads together, and with the help of the minister, they bought Katharine's home in record time and then turned it into the Katharine Susannah Prichard Writers Centre, which supports emerging writers and runs workshops and poetry workshops and all manner of things, actually. And it's very active. So that's just a couple of little memories of your family. I didn't really know your dad, but I certainly have read his book, and I was brought up with reading Katharine's books. So she had quite an influence on my life.
Oh, well, look, you're one of the people we have to thank for the KSP Writer Centre. That's fantastic.
I was just in the right place at the right time, and
And I knew Joan Williams. They were very good. I was a friend of her daughter, Gabby's.
Gabby, yes, that's right.
They were very, very good friends of Katharine's, and I saw them every time I went to Perth. In answer to your first question, I did know her very well. I used to go to Western Australia every year when I was little. Like mum and dad, we'd drive across the Nullarbor a couple of times, and one time we put the car on the train.
Yes.
And then after that, when I was a bit older, I'd fly over every year. I actually had the job as her secretary for a while, typing answers to her enormous correspondence. I'll never forget. And, you know, this is 2-finger typing on a little Olivetti, which I still own. But no, we were very close. I just lament the fact that I think, as I say in the book, that she died before I really, you know, came out politically. I remember having earnest discussions with her about communism, and I didn't believe in the collective. I was an individualist, and you know, and she died before I changed, which is really sad. But no, she was a huge influence on me, needless to say.
Thank you for that. We do have another question from Anne. So go ahead, Anne. Thank you.
Another one, Karen. Just, from
I like your questions there.
Oh, good. Fellow poet biographer. And also someone who's engaged in a really long, lengthy, drawn out. Mine was 25 years, so I think you said 10 years. But still, you know, how did you pace yourself over 10 years? How did you keep in there? How did you keep coming back? Tell us about that.
Well, look, I guess I really did have this passion that story had to be told more than anything. I mean, I've published poetry books in between, and it wasn't 10 years of writing either. As I think I said, I would, you know, I did one draft and I sent it out there. And actually, the draft that got shortlisted for the Dorothy Hewitt was half the size of the current book, and Dorothy took me aside after I didn't win and said, it's not long enough, you need to do some more work, which is where I met Philip, because I thought I need to understand some more of the history and get some, you know, bit more meat on the bones. And so I didn't know Philip. I knew people who knew him and said, oh, you know, in fact, I know what it was. I got into Jeff, who was too busy, and recommended I talk to Philip. I said, I've got this idea of a book, and would you be interested? And no, he said, Phil Deery's the one. And it made an enormous difference. And we sat down and, you know, I did a lot more work on the historical side of it. And it was also suggested to put more personal information, you know, the little essays I've got in there all appeared at that stage. And then, you know, I'd try to publisher and that didn't work, into the drawer, and then I'd do a few other things, but it just sat there buzzing in the drawer. It was never going to stay there forever because I just, you know, it's on the top of my bucket list getting this book out, so I can be run over by a bus and I'm happy. You know?
But I love you saying that it was buzzing.
I really needed it out there.
I love you saying that it was buzzing in the drawer, because that sort of speaks of its aliveness, you know, in your psyche, in your drawer. That's fantastic. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne.
That was great. We have another question. We have a question from Tony. Thank you, Tony.
Oh, hi, I'm Joan Williams' son, and I've got a triple connection with Katharine. My grandmother, Marjorie, was carer to Katharine in her declining years. My mother, of course, was an intimate friend of Katharine, and I was a young journalist and interviewed Katharine at least once for a feature. So I've read all Katharine's books, and I actually contemplated doing my MA on Katharine, but moved on to another, to Christina Stead. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in. Thanks.
Nice to meet you, Tony, and give my regards to Gabby.
Yeah, sure.
Who I lost track of, you know, when I stopped visiting Western Australia, but she was my best mate every time I'd go over.
Oh, she's still going strong.
It's good to hear.
I love all these connections on the left in Australia. It proves my point that it's not such a very big country after all. I'm reading the comments and on the chat, and that's fantastic. We have another question from Joe.
Hi, Karen. Hope you keep well. Regards to your family. Best wishes. Well done. Yeah, no, it's terrific, fantastic. We must catch up sometime. That would be good. I was just going to ask. I really enjoyed what Jeff Sparrow had to say, but sort of the period of time it's taken for the book to come out and the context in which it now comes out. I'm just wondering about your thoughts about that, about what this. We've sort of got a very strong sense about what this story means for you and your family, but in terms of as a political story in the context we're operating in now, what are your thoughts about that?
Like Jeff, I think it's very timely because it is about scapegoating, and we know that this is what the current governments are doing. You know, I think one of the first times I tried to get it out in the world, it was just when all of the every person who has a Middle Eastern face is a terrorist era started, and I thought this is about scapegoating. You know, this is timely now, and I think I'm afraid it doesn't stop being timely, and I mean that's sad. But I think with the rise of the new right, you know, that gives an extra clout to it at the moment, I think. You know, because of when I tried to get it out there, every time I do it, there'd be some, you know, I'd be writing my little thing, why this book should be published, because out there are events that show that it's still important that we understand these things.
Lisa,
excellent.
Can I have a word, Lisa? Yes, Peter Love.
What have I got to do?
Oh, okay. Which one's first? Oh, all right, okay. Karen, I met you briefly at dinner one night, actually, after I launched one of your father's books in Richmond. And I have to say, he struck me both in his writing and also in person as an absolutely lovely bloke, actually. I quite got sort of moved warm.
Sound so surprised.
Yeah. But no, it was true. It was true because I got a great sense of that, you know, this is a warm and loving family that I'm dining with here. I know the book now, and I have a feel for the man who's not one of those hard men communists whom I knew so well, who'd been, you know, hardened by the oppression of them and the fighting back that they got when they tried to fight for something decent, but also how there was that warmth and decency among your lot, despite the shit that had been heaped on your father and their family over all those years. I was really quite impressed with the way in which your family held together that love and decency, which was perfectly clear to an outsider who popped in for dinner.
That's lovely. Thank you, Peter. Yeah. Now, I've met you since. I met you at the occasion when I found out about Janie, that Labor History Conference in Perth. And it was a book about the new theatre being launched.
No, the one that I did was about that. The one about the diplomat in the Caribbean.
Oh yeah, no, that's Dad's book. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's his. Yeah.
All these connections we're making tonight, it's fantastic. I'm reading messages from people who are listening and watching on Facebook, people who are remembering family and social and political connections. And that's just a wonderful thing. I'm not sure if we have any more questions. Do we have any more questions? Someone's putting their hand up. So,
Vivian Damon, can you hear me? No? Can you hear me?
Can. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, hello. Well, this is just a connection. My family, who were all communists, as I am, it's almost a word that's forbidden these days, that we were, Katharine was a comrade of my family, and my family hailed from, well, a part of it, my father from Germany, my mother and the Coleman family from Kalgoorlie Boulder. And when Katharine was sourcing material for her trilogy of the goldfields of Kalgoorlie Boulder, the eastern goldfields of Western Australia, she actually lived with, spent most of her time with my mother's family, the Coleman family. And my mother and her eldest brother were actually used as characters for one of her books as part of the trilogy. But my husband and I also spent time, we lived eventually just around the corner from Katharine. We spent a few weeks there with her when they were looking for someone to just to be with her for a short time. But Katharine, I have a cousin here. I have 12 cousins. I had 12 cousins. We all knew Katharine very well. She visited our families. She was always a great inspiration, a woman of enormous courage and bravery. And I can see that that the rest of the family appear to have inherited that. And I say congratulations on the book. It is a very important book because we are heading into very catastrophic times. We're almost entering a period of neo-feudalism and it's just very dangerous times. So the book is very timely and congratulations. My cousin and I, my cousin who was with me, we look forward to reading it. And but my family also experienced ASIO with my grandfather being imprisoned for a short time. But thank you again and good luck to everybody involved. So now how do I turn myself off? Oh, just mute me. I talk endlessly.
Look, it's wonderful to hear these things from everyone. We're nearing the end of our event, and I'd like to very much thank Jeff, Janie and Karen, of course, for this wonderful launch of The Crime of Not Knowing Your Crime, published by Interventions, available for the next day and a half at the special price of $35. You can order online. We have from Interventions actually 4 books coming out in the next 3 months, which is astonishing, but we are pretty hard workers, given that we do this for love. We have Sylvia Martin, who I believe is with us today. Sylvia's book, Passionate Friends. We expect to publish that in August. We have Tomo Lincoln's book, The Neighbour from Hell, also coming out in August. We have Bobby Oliver's book about conscientious objectors called Hell No, We Won't Go. We hope to bring that out in September. And in October is my own modest contribution to Interventions, the new theatre in Australia. Anyone who'd like to know more about Interventions or any of our books, or if you have a proposal for a book, we'd love to hear from you. Go and visit our website. You'll see the contact details there. Have a look on our Facebook page and join our mailing list. So in closing this event, again, I'd like to thank Jeff and Karen in particular. I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank our co-host Nibs and the Search Foundation, and best wishes and my great thanks to Maddie for organising the tech and the online event. The event has been recorded and will be available on Facebook. It's been so lovely to see all your faces, hear some of your voices, and especially some of our old friends from the left. So thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Are we allowed to leave?
Huh?
I don't know whether I'm
allowed to leave.
I don't know.
I think we can go.
I'm going to look at the
Drop
chat.
off and have a bed, eh?